Regarding men, women, and relationships, discussing Paul Elam's new book.
Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm here with Paul Elam of A Voice for Men and an Ear for Men. And I'm also here with Tom Golden of Men Are Good. And I'm Janice Pimengo. And we are going to discuss Paul Elam's book, which has just come out a few weeks ago, I think, Men, Women, Relationships. And it's an amazing read. And there are so many interesting things to talk about in it. It is a book that I think its main point of originality, I would say, is that it does not merely, and merely is still a big significant thing, it does not merely talk about all of the problems that confront men today as a result of gynocentrism and feminism, which is gynocentrism on steroids. It does not only look at those issues with empathy and insight and anger and compassion, but it also proposes solutions. And it's really exciting in that way. And it holds men accountable for those solutions and says that men have the responsibility, and even I think you say, Paul, the sacred duty to pursue those solutions. So it's exciting. It's a challenge to men. It's not about men being victims and blaming feminism or gynocentrism. It's about holding men accountable for changing the way men are in the world and for offering themselves as models to the next generation of young men. I just thought it was really exciting and exhilarating to read all of those essays together, making that challenge. And so I think we're going to just get started talking and asking questions and going at it. And I wanted to say one thing that sort of surprised me about the book that I really appreciated was that you helped me to see something that I really value in the two men that have been most influential and important in my life. My father, Vince Fiamengo, who was a commercial fisherman, and my husband, David Solway, who's a political writer and a poet and a singer-songwriter. And those two men have absolutely nothing in common. And when my father was alive, I doubt they ever really had a real conversation or liked one another that much. But this is the thing I realized that they share, and that is a very strong sense of identity connected to what they create, what they work at. And that's all. It was something I loved about my father. My father was all about being the best at what he did, not the best in terms of competing with others or wanting to show off or anything like that, but just holding himself to a high standard, both as a commercial fisherman and he was a leader in various organizations connected to serving the fishing community. And I see that in my husband too, in his writing, perfecting his craft, working tirelessly day after day to get a song right or an article right. It's something I love about him. And it's also something I like when I'm my best self too. But I wasn't quite expecting that in the book, that's one of the things you hold out to men, I think, as a way out of some of the impasse that modern feminism and gynocentrism has created for men, is crafting an identity for themselves that is empowering, because it isn't about pleasing a woman or guaranteeing her love or sacrificing for a woman. And I thought that was really wonderful and valuable.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I've really enjoyed reading the book, and I haven't finished it yet, I have to admit, but I'm probably 2/3 of the way through it. It's been a good read, an enjoyable read, and it's pure Elam. If you like what Paul has written before, you're going to love this because it's provocative, it's bold, and it's right. It's pretty simple, really. And as I was reading it, Paul, I got to say, I came up with a title that I thought was better than the one you had. And that title is this: A Map for Men in a Time of Chaos. Because to me, that kind of as I read the book, I just saw that you're mapping out what it is that is impinging upon men that throws them into chaos now. And what's gynocentrism? What is chivalry? What are all these things? And how can we deal with that? How do we move out of that chaos? So it's like a map. The book to me is like a map. It's like a map. It's like something, and men love maps. To me, give me a map any day. And
As much as we're accused of not reading them.
Yeah, well, I'd much rather read a map than ask for directions, any day of the week. So give me the map. And to me, the book was kind of like a map. Did you have that in mind when you wrote it or not?
I think more accurately, well, first let me say, God, I'm humbled by all these glowing words from both of you. Thank you for that. And I won't say anything more, just accept more. But no, to answer your question, I think this is a collection of essays, and it's been the intent of my work for the past 10 years to draw that map for myself.
Yes.
That this is really where this is emanating from, because dealing with our social programming as men and dealing with gynocentrism and all these things is so new. It is very new. You can't find books on this throughout the history of literature. You can't find anything in the work of the founding fathers of psychology on this. You don't find, and you certainly won't find any of this today in the APA. Right. A lot of this has not been articulated before. And
Correct.
So as I wrote, I was really trying to articulate what was going on with me and how I interpret the world. And of course, I've combined that with the 30 plus years of work I've done with men on their issues. And to be frank, the first 10 or 12 years of which I was not aware of these issues.
Right. Right.
So it is also sort of going back a story of my awakening to these things. But yes, to answer your question in a nutshell, the book is intended to be a way out for men, because that is the common experience of men. When I go back and look at all the men I've dealt with over the years, one way or another, it's about feeling trapped.
Yes.
It's about feeling trapped in not feeling loved.
Yes.
In producing and working and doing all these things, and yet feeling isolated and alone all the time. And what do we need to do to get out of that? And I believe it begins with a connection to yourself, which we have that beaten out of us as men. We do. Society, this isn't about you. It's about others. It's about taking care of women. It's about taking care of children. It's about fighting for your country. It's about taking care of society. Nothing for men about taking care of you.
Right.
And then, of course, we mock them when they don't go to the doctor in a regular way. But so the idea, yes, and I'm probably getting too wordy here, but the idea, yes, is to get a way out of this and into a connection with yourself that's functional and that's affirming in your life.
And the book, I think another thing I want to point out is the book teaches by telling stories. Whether it's Joe Bob or Uncle Walter, it's like you tell these stories of men and their experience, and that makes the point. It's like that just grabs the psyche of men and go, oh, I can understand that. I get that. That's the story that is in my life too. So it's a storybook in a lot of ways.
Well, that's an ultimate compliment. Some of the work I've done with Peter Wright that I value a whole lot is about narratives.
Yes.
The importance of story can't be overstated in the lives of all human beings. Our archetypes, the stories, the narratives of our lives, this mural of our lives that are painted on the walls of our consciousness, and changing that, making that different and seeing it in a different light is all it really takes. Everybody, you two know this, and everybody who ever has swallowed a red pill knows that it changes the narrative of their lives. It changes the way they see everything from the ground up. And so telling stories is a great way to do that.
Yes. Because the mind is built for stories. It's not built for numbers.
That's
And
about.
your book tells stories, you know, whether it's Walter or Johnny or Joe Bob. I mean, it's just filled with stories about men, and they're
I
great
thought
stories.
I thought the Uncle Walter story was actually
Oh,
just that
heartbreaking.
one really, yeah,
Oh,
that brought me to tears. It's
yeah, yeah, really.
very short, and yet it conveys a whole world of pain and insight into the experience of men. And I mean, you are a writer. You know, it was interesting to me that you mentioned that you'd always wanted to be a writer and that you hadn't really been encouraged to do that for years, and so hadn't, and kind of came to it later in life. I thought that was fascinating. But you really are. I mean, you said there, that was one of the many passages that I excerpted. You talked about seeing this man when you were young, your Uncle Walter, when you
Yeah.
used to go visit his wife, your aunt, and you'd be in the kitchen with the women, and bread would be being made, and there was all this merriment, and there was Uncle Walter sort of tucked away, lying on his bed, and you went, you saw him there, and he looked at you without smiling, and you had this awareness of him as somehow not even being part of that home, that he, even though his money had made it and his money had maintained it, and the work he had done had made it possible for it to come into existence, yet he wasn't at the center of that home. He was on the outside, or not even part of it. And you said at the end that you hadn't thought about him very much. And then you said that he'd scarcely crossed my mind since the day one possible frightening version of me lay in solitude on a deathbed while the kitchen was alive with food and family. All this in a home he built, but in which in some ways he was not allowed to belong. Whoever you were, Uncle Walter, wherever you are, please know that I'm looking back at you now and I see you. I thought that was just so good. And I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, because it's
I will say that moment that I described in that story of standing in that bedroom, eye to eye with him back when I was young, that's one of the most vivid memories of that time of my life.
Huh.
For some reason, that moment really imprinted into my life. And I did not understand it at the time. I wasn't asking the questions.
Right.
Why is he in here when everybody else is over there? Why is all the fun and the smell of food something coming from a distance in the house? And here we were back in this, and I didn't think of any of that. If anything, I just felt a little bit frightened and intimidated.
Right.
That somehow he didn't like me, or that if given a chance, he might be mean to me. And of course, now looking back at it, that's how they look at all of us men. That's how the world looks at men.
Yes.
Especially when they're in distress. And it wasn't too long after that he died.
Right.
He was on his deathbed.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody in the house knew it at the time.
Yeah.
And that may have been one of the defining moments in my life.
Yeah. He was a good teacher.
Without uttering a word.
Yeah. No words.
Yeah.
Very masculine.
Yeah. Well, and you know, and that is, it's sad, you know, and you're putting your finger there, I think, on one of the problems that men have is men's lack of empathy for other men, perhaps partly because, as in the case that you described with your Uncle Walter, men don't like to look at men's pain because they recognize that in some way it is their own pain, or their own future pain, their own future insignificance or expendability, or their own ostracism from the home, or from the center, from the place of love and belonging, that you know, that they're recognizing in other men. So yeah, I just thought that was so poignant. And there's much about this book. I mean, this book is so interesting because on the one hand, it is a devastatingly frank, and I don't think pessimistic is necessary. That's not the right word, but very frank and blunt about the situation we're in now, and that
realistic.
Yeah, very realistic.
Yeah.
And that's especially focused for what is, for me, potentially the most important chapter, which is the chapter 8 laws governing men and women.
I was going to bring that one up.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
And, or maybe the second most, and I'll get to the one I think could vie for it importance. And it's, it is heavy. Its diagnosis of where we are now and where we're going to is pretty devastating.
Yes.
You talk about, one of the laws of men is that men will not oppose anything perceived to benefit women. You go on to explain that protecting women and providing for them and their children takes primacy over everything, even, as you say, critical thinking. And then you go on, the second law relating to men is that men will attack and shun other men for violating law number 1. And then the third law, men have almost no limits to how far they will go regarding adherence to laws number 1, protecting women or perceiving to protect women, and 2, attacking any man who doesn't adhere to that law. So that's the situation of men. And then you go on to say that women have virtually no limits to how far they will go regarding adherence to laws number 1 and 2 in terms of willingness to see their own children psychologically damaged for perceived personal advantage to women, and seeing male loved ones abused and even destroyed by the state and other entities for the advantage of other women. So here are these 2 totally opposed and yet interlocking psychodynamics of men and women being exploited, as you say, by the state in its quest for total power and by various corporate interests. I mean, that's an incredible, I really recommend that chapter. It's so good. And it is pretty darn bleak. It's a recipe for an enfeebled, monstrously unjust, functioning but dysfunctional society where you have governments and big corporations exploiting these aspects of human nature essentially to control the population for the benefit of an elite few. And you make it clear that we are seeing that, and you analyze the various ways that this program is being put into action. Yet, you wrote this book, and this is a book about men changing. And so then you have your later chapter where you're talking about solutions called The Plague of Modern Masculinity. And what you're talking about there is men making a different narrative for themselves, men making a different identity, making a different archetype for themselves. And so there's an interesting tension in the book, because on the one hand, you're talking about laws, that you didn't just say tendencies, you said laws of men and women. But on the other hand, obviously you must have some hope if you wrote this book and you're encouraging men to create new roles for themselves, to truly break gender roles. And your point, of course, is that feminism never did break gender roles. Feminism reinforced traditional gender roles. And so now the challenge you're laying down is, let's actually rework them for the modern world. And obviously you must have some hope that that's possible.
Well, I think the approach I've taken to it is that we really can't save the world, but we can save ourselves. I've never seen the men's movement as one that's going to result in a men's rights parade down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington D.C. with ticker tape. I don't see myself sitting on the back of a convertible, anything like that.
Waving.
Yeah,
I can see it.
No, if I'm doing like that, waving, I'll be wearing a bulletproof vest.
Yeah. And helmet.
Yeah, and helmet, yes, and all kinds of riot gear. But this is not going to result. Gynocentrism, in my opinion, is not defeatable.
Right.
It is part of the human condition.
Yes.
And there is only a small percentage of people who can begin to reverse that programming. And reversing the programming is a lifelong affair. I still struggle with gynocentrism in myself. After all these years of working on it, it'll rear up just like that because it's part of my nature.
Yes.
So I've never seen this as something that we're ever going to see a collective shift in the mentality of our entire society about men. But there is some observations about counterculture that come into this that are very important. If you look back at the Bohemians and beatniks and hippies, what they all have in common is that they started out being hated by the world around them.
Yes.
And being derided, and then they ended up having an enormous impact on the world around them, even if the impact wasn't direct. I mean, you can love or hate hippies, but they changed society in a lot of ways. But what we can do is develop this counterculture. We can have men and women connecting with each other who don't want that crazy world of psychotherapists who are abusing people to push a political agenda, who don't want to see men thrown into meat grinders of armed conflict around the planet for the sake of heroics and for the sake of whatever corporate entities find useful in them in that way. And to have these people connect with each other, we can save a subculture. We can give them at least an intellectual retreat, a reprieve away from all this sick mentality about what men are. And in the end, I really do believe, as maybe as idealistic as this sounds, I believe that we can have a subculture of men and women who value each other. Yeah. We may not ever have, and we probably never will have. I don't even think equality strictly defined is a very good goal for anybody. But equal valuing is, we can have people value each other as human beings in an equal way, but you can't do that and be gynocentric at the same time.
Right. You
can't do that and be chivalrous at the same time. It's impossible. There's no equality in chivalry or gynocentrism or in hating men.
Amen to that.
So this, I think, provides an alternative for those who want it.
Yeah.
The only big challenge is growing that community to the point that, I mean, we're getting ready to do a conference in Chicago, and they're magical, and that's really great. But the downside of that reality is that they're magical because we're otherwise isolated, except during the conferences, isolated from each other or connected just online, which is not as fulfilling as real world connections with people. But that is the aim of the work, the book. Everything I've done is really toward trying to foster a counterculture that views men with compassion and sees them as worthy of having choice in their lives. But unlike what I've been accused of, I've been two things accused of regularly. One is that this is just like feminism. It is not. You will never read the level of accountability in a feminist text that I've put into this book or anywhere close. And the other thing is that, God, I lost my train of thought here.
Something else that you've been accused of? Women? Was that the?
Yes, that was it.
Feminism.
This is about, not wanting women to have agency in their lives and not wanting them to have control, not wanting them to have rights. Of course, it's a load of garbage that a lot of people happen to believe very readily, because the moment the animosity, generally speaking, toward men is so great that the moment that you use a term like men's rights, oh, you must hate women. And people will believe that. But this is about valuing human beings, all of them. And I know I always, there's a small contingent of guys in my comments and around the manosphere are like, fuck women, they're all bitches, and, what can I say? I'd rather be in the men's movement where that represents a small contingent of men who are very vocal than be in feminism where that represents the mainstream mode of thought. I think we're still doing better.
Yes.
But yeah, you nailed it with the question. That was the whole intent.
Yeah, Paul, when you think of this book, who do you think of should read it? Who are you thinking of?
God, one big regret, is that my father's not here.
Ah,
I think he would have loved it.
ah,
He was starting to soften in his old age, and the Alzheimer's took him early. And it was a real shame because just before the Alzheimer's started getting bad, he started softening about a lot of things. And I think he would have really loved it. But my intended audience for this book,
right.
I mean, that was personal, but the intended audience for this book is for any man or woman who thinks there's something wrong going on in the world between men and women, who maybe can't put their finger on it. That's how I was when I found the myth of male power. I knew that stuff was wrong. I knew there was all kinds of wrong stuff. And of course, being socialized gynocentrically, I was trained not to even be able to connect dots and come to conclusions that were accurate. And that book lit up my mind. And all of a sudden, a lot of dots got connected all at once. So
Yes.
kind of a scary experience.
Yes.
But mainly for men who are new to red pill, women who are new to red pill, and for people in general who might like to see something different than what we've got going on right now between men and women, which is this huge chasm of mistrust, bitterness, a lot of hatred on both sides of the fence. I'd like to see this have an impact in a positive way on people in that regard.
Yeah. Good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you articulate it so well. At one point in the chapter, "The Plague of Modern Masculinity," which is an incredibly powerful chapter, you talk about what's happened over the years, and you talk about the feminist attack, the war on masculine authority, and you talk about how what's happened is that women, using their raw biological power, have taken over the dominant alpha status in our culture. And the result is quickly becoming an age of oppression and injustice, more insidious and intractable than any other. And I think that is so true. Yep. And you say it is in the biological survival-oriented nature of women to enhance their lives through the utilization of male labor and male expendability without compunction or moral constraint. And that is exactly what our culture has ended up on an Orwellian scale. And then when you say, this is your sort of your thesis about about the problem of defeating this. The problem is even in sort of finding where it is. And I thought you articulated it so well. You say, defeating this monstrosity requires the insanely formidable task of battling figuratively through great beta enforcers, masquerading as alpha controllers, not to a command post with someone in charge, not that kind of war, but through a pervasive ideology that snakes like countless invisible tentacles through the consciousness of the population at large, and that emanates from the very heart of human evolutionary psychology.
Yeah.
Wow, that is it. That's why it's so difficult, I think, to identify. And so that's why this isn't about attacking feminists or being angry at women.
Right.
It's about recognizing the very deep source.
Well, there's a little bit of attacking feminists in there.
Well,
I should hope so.
I couldn't help myself.
Well, yeah, right, exactly. Feminism, for sure. But it isn't a matter of attacking individual feminists even so much, although I agree, we absolutely need to attack their ideas. But that this is something that's in both men and women. And that's what I find so interesting about the book, that you really do hold men to account for all of their choices, all the ways men willingly participate, partly because they love women so much and they're shattered at the thought of not holding on to a woman's love. And yet you're uncompromising about your insistence that men have to take responsibility for their choices.
And I want to just point out on a personal level that practicing this in my life has not cost me a woman's love. It has not cost me the love of a woman. it possibly cost me the approval of women who were incapable of loving anybody, if you want to consider that a loss. But in my personal life, I've been at it for 17 years with the same woman. I haven't lost anything by hanging on to my values.
Nice.
Not a thing. And more importantly, I haven't lost myself.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm really recommending to men. Gosh, it's like that old simple stuff that we learn in kindergarten, that if your friends really care, they won't abandon you when you're being yourself. Well, if you're being who you are and you're living by values, even if they don't include chivalry and gynocentrism, any woman worth her salt, any woman worth being with is not going to leave. And if she will, bye-bye.
Indeed.
Yeah. And I appreciate the practical side of the
Yes.
chapters too. When you talk about those specific moments, the specific kind of argument that you get into, the specific situation where, as a man, you feel you're trapped and terrified and confused and beaten into emotional submission. I think your very practical strategies for how to deal with those moments are really useful too. So you've combined like a really profound philosophy about how we got to where we are with very practical suggestions, and that's what makes it such a good book too.
Yes. Yeah, it's a map with exit points, that says here, you can go here if you want to make things better. So guys, this is a good map. This is a good map to help you understand what's going on and to help you maybe find your own center and find your own way, which way you need to go. Indeed.
And I'd like to add, I think it's a map intended for men no matter where they're at with women. I mean, I have a substantial amount of MGTOW in my audience, and I believe the book will appeal to them and be useful to them.
Absolutely.
I also have men who are in relationship, men who are married, men who have girlfriends or just want to date. And I think that they can benefit from it too. I don't think anybody gets shorted on this.
I agree. 100%.
And I hope, above all hopes, that I haven't tried to instruct anyone in this text on what direction they should take.
No.
Yeah, it didn't seem like it.
No, this is about men. It's made clear in the book, I think, that this is about men finding their own way.
Yeah.
Becoming the creators of their own lives. And I thought that was really exciting too. Yeah, the idea of how do you pronounce it? The Zeta male or the Zeta male?
Zeta, I think it's Zeta. Zeta?
Yeah.
Zeta, I think it's Zeta actually.
Yeah, Zeta male. Yeah. Mm-hmm. This is the male that's just coming into being, who's creating his own identity.
Yeah.
Just another name for a red pill man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's it. Are we good?
I think we're good.
I think it's a good book.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well worth having a look at.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm looking forward to reading the rest and catching up with Janice. So.
Yeah. So thanks for doing it, Paul. It's
man.
real labor of love and a
huge service.
Please read. You spark a lot of recognition, and it helps to reorient the whole world.
Yep.
That's really valuable.
Good stuff. So on that note, are we finished?
I do believe we're finished.
All right. Okie doke.
People, there is a link below if you would like the book.
Definitely
I
so.
appreciate that. And for those who have read it, your honest reviews on Amazon are very helpful, very informative to me, and help spread the word about the book as well.
Indeed. Jolly good.
Right. All right.
That's good. So men are good.
They are good.
As is Mr. Elam.
Mhm.
And we'll see you next time. Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.